Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbert brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbert.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to this March 24th, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Friends, tonight in the news, we'll open up with a story out of the United States. We will go to the missing Malaysian plane and give you all the latest news, right up to the last minute, on what's being said there and what's happened, and video related to that. And we'll also have video tonight on what's happened in the train derailment in Chicago. But first, let's go to that story out of the state of Washington, with authorities there saying they have 108 reports of people missing or unaccounted for after Saturday's huge landslide in the northwestern U.S. state of Washington. 8 bodies have been recovered so far after the 54-meter, 175-foot deep wall of mud swept near the town of Oso, about 55 miles, 90 kilometers north of Seattle. Search crews have worked day and night using helicopters in the dangerous conditions that destroyed 30 homes. Opening up our report for tonight is David Willis, reporting from Washington, D.C.
From the air, you can see the extended station, an entire town wiped off the map by a massive mudslide. A recent census put the town of Oso's population at 180. Officials say reports filed with different agencies suggest that more than 100 could be missing.
To date, there are 108 reports of names of individuals who are either unaccounted for or missing. I want to stop at that point and clarify that these are 108 reports.
It happened after part of a nearby mountainside gave way, taking trees and other debris with it. Rescuers heard people crying for help from amongst the wreckage, but couldn't get to them. The tangle of mud and debris, 15 feet deep in places, was sucking them in like quicksand. 30 homes are thought to have been destroyed.
I want to let everyone know that the situation is very grim. We're still holding out hope that we're going to be able to find people that may still be alive. But keep in mind, we have not found anybody alive on this pile since Saturday in the initial stages of our operation. But again, we're still in a rescue mode.
Local resident Sean Wright ran towards the screams to find a baby and his mother buried beneath the debris. He used chainsaws to get them out alive.
Where we got her was just debris. You couldn't tell anything was houses. It was just all debris.
The mudslide occurred without warning and is being blamed on recent heavy rains. There are more storms on the way, and it would seem little chance of finding anyone else alive. David Willis, BBC News, Washington, D.C.
And friends, David Willis is reporting from the BBC's headquarters office, which is in Washington, D.C. This landslide happened in the state of Washington. That's just to clarify that, so there's hopefully no confusion on it. Sad situation for the people of the United States, for the northwestern United State of Washington. Friends, we will, as I mentioned a moment ago, we will be going to the situation regarding the missing flight. China has announced that definitely the debris that's been spotted was the plane. However, following that, we're going to show you all the video. Following that, Australia, whose Navy is going to try to bring pieces of what's that debris that's been spotted in, following the report that China made, that's the plane, and the Malaysian people began, of course, many of the relatives just went into extreme shock and crying. We have video of all of that for you tonight. But Australia, whose Navy will be retrieving the debris pieces, is saying that until we examine it, they're not going online with the rest of the stories. We'll have all of that coming up in just a little bit. But first, there's a story out of Egypt, and one other story I want to cover that is significant from today. Egypt's court sentences 529 Morsi supporters to death. A court in Egypt has sentenced, as I said, 529 supporters of ousted Islamist President Mohamed Morsi to death. They were convicted of charges including murdering a policeman and attacks on people and property. Orla Gurin reports from Egypt.
Wives and mothers voicing their anger and their anguish after a devastating verdict reached at breakneck speed. We won't stand for this, they cry. Almost 530 men sentenced to hang on day 2 of their trial. This was some of the violence at the heart of the case. Riots last August, in which one police officer was killed. They were sparked by the deaths of more than 600 protesters in Cairo when security forces violently dispersed 2 Islamist sit-ins. Well, we've managed to track down one of the men who has been sentenced to death, and we're on our way to see him. He's on bail here in Cairo. He's worried about speaking out, so he's asked us not to reveal his identity or his exact location. But he has agreed to speak to us about the case. He told us he belonged to the now banned Muslim Brotherhood, but he insisted he was innocent and had been denied justice. The case was referred to the criminal court a month ago, he said. There were over 1,000 pages of legal documents. The defence team didn't have time to read them or examine the evidence. Brotherhood members are getting used to being caged in court, including the deposed president, Mohamed Morsi. But after today's verdict, critics say Egyptian justice is in the dock.
It's a grotesque ruling. 529 defendants being sentenced to death after a trial that appears to be a sham trial is highly problematic. This is the largest number of people sentenced to death in a single trial that Amnesty International has documented.
Many see the verdict as a serious escalation in the state's attempts to crush the Brotherhood and end its opposition on the streets. Tomorrow there's another mass trial of Brotherhood supporters. Orla Gurin, BBC News, Cairo.
Okay, friends, we'll be following that again tomorrow with the trial continuing, or another trial tomorrow. Now, before we go to that missing Malaysian plane, which some are saying it's been found in the Indian Ocean area where they spotted debris, the third set of debris spottings by satellite, and others saying we're not sure yet. So before we go to the conflicting and confusing reports on that, which we'll bring you in a few moments, I've got 3 stories, 3 videos related to the Ukraine and what's happening there. And that extremely significant ongoing story that's got potential for extreme worldwide impact. Ukraine's interim president Alexander Turchinov says he has ordered the withdrawal of armed forces from Crimea. Members of the G7 group, they're now calling it G7, not G8, because they're leaving Russia, the Russian president, out of it, and Russia out of it. It's now the G7 group of industrialized nations are meeting in the Netherlands. To the G8 that was going to be in Russia is that's off the table now, as you'll hear. The G7 group is meeting of industrialized nations is meeting in the Netherlands to discuss what action to take against Russia. President Obama is there, and he said, you'll hear him say how Europe and America were united in imposing a cost on Russia for its actions in the Ukraine. Gavin Hewitt has this report.
In Crimea, every Ukrainian military base is now under Russian control. Many of the Ukrainian soldiers, without their uniforms, are being pulled out of the region. Token resistance has ended. In Moscow, in the parliament, the flags of Crimea and Sevastopol were added to the flags of Russia's regions. Images intended to demonstrate that from the Russian perspective, Crimea's future has been settled. In the Netherlands, President Obama arrived for a summit on nuclear security, but it was completely overshadowed by the crisis in Ukraine. The American president, who was shown a restored museum for Dutch masters, was determined to keep the pressure on Russia and to signal it could not expect a place at the world's top table for the time being.
Europe and America are united in our support of the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian people. We're united in imposing a cost on Russia for its actions so far.
As the motorcade swept into The Hague, President Putin's was not among them, and the leaders of the world's most powerful economies, the G8, were set to discuss what to do about Russia. Is it now time to exclude Russia from the G8 and make it a G7?
Well, we should be clear, there's not going to be a G8 summit this year in Russia. That's absolutely clear. We'll be meeting tonight, the 7 other countries of the G8, to determine the way forward. But frankly, it is Russia that needs to change course.
The White House indicated that Russia would not be formally kicked out of the Group of 8. More a cold shoulder. For President Obama arriving here, the priority is to try and demonstrate just how isolated Russia is within the international community, and also to try and show that the United States and Europe are united when it comes to dealing with Russia over the crisis in Ukraine. On the sidelines of this meeting, there was one more positive sign. There are reports the Russian foreign minister is expected to meet his Ukrainian counterpart for the first time. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, The Hague.
Thank you, Mr. Hewitt. Gavin. You know, friends, in a way, does it not seem hypocritical to you on the part of the United States that, you know, we had the story on Egypt just before this one. Does it not seem a little bit hypocritical that the United States took a position with Egypt to allow the sovereignty there when Mubarak was at the helm and had been at the helm for a long time and had been an ally, a good friend of the United States? The United States just turning cold shoulder. The United States just turned cold shoulder on the former President Mubarak during the time of the spring uprising in Egypt. And the United States was in favor of allowing the citizenry of Egypt to have its revolt and rise up against the incumbent president of a long time and an ally in front of the United States. And oh yeah, you know, the then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton went over there and gave support to the newly elected president, who's now ousted, and we're all in favor of that change of sovereignty. But now the United States is waving a flag that, oh, you cannot change the sovereignty situation in the Ukraine, even though the people in the area of Crimea, who are basically Russian-speaking people, they're of the Russian culture, that area at one time was under Russian control in the form of the United States of Soviet Russia, and up until 1954, when Khrushchev decided to give it to the Ukraine, and but the people, they feel like they're still part of Russia, the people of that area. And so, like what happened in Egypt, the people in the Crimean area, they have spoken out, and they want to go with Russia. And so, you know, shouldn't the United States act like it did with Egypt, just sit back and, you know, wait till it all pans out? No, it's the United States in this instance is saying, you know, saber-rattling and saying the sovereignty shouldn't be messed with in the Ukraine. You know, well, Why didn't we do that? Why didn't the United States do that when Egypt, the citizenry of Egypt, was first uprising against its longtime ally and friend Mubarak? There's a double standard here, friends. Can you not see that? And a little picking and choosing and what have you. But it's going to ultimately write the lesson in history that Jesus Christ, God the Father, wants mankind to write and to understand, that mankind under the influence and sway of Satan will make the wrong choices every time, and man cannot govern himself, left to himself. And were not it a fact in the Bible that there's a promise that God will intervene just at the last moment before mankind would annihilate all mankind? That's where the lesson of history of man trying to govern himself will lead. It would lead to the annihilation of all mankind at the hand of mankind. Can we really call it mankind when mankind, which really doesn't mean kind men, but it means, men after the flesh, men of the flesh, like, cattle after the cattle kind. That's, cows produce cows, men produce human beings. We don't produce spiritual beings, eternal beings. We produce mortals, as the Bible calls us, mortals. And yet men of religion want to say that, this mortal that we are has an immortal soul. Oh, no, it doesn't. It has a soul that will die unless God transforms you into spirit, which he only does if he calls you and you overcome and qualify. I hear some of you right now, oh no, eternal life is a gift, Stephen. Yes, it's a gift, but just like an inheritance, when a parent leaves a child an inheritance, the will oftentimes will say there are conditions. Maybe the child, has to give up smoking, or maybe this, oftentimes there can be conditions in a gift. Whatever. There've been all kind of conditions made in gifts. You got to marry a certain type of person, or not be married, or not drink, or not smoke, or I'm just throwing some things off the top of my head. Some of you probably know some really detailed things that have been in a will that says the son or daughter doesn't get this gift if they do certain things, or if they don't do certain things, they won't get the gift. Still, it's a gift, but you can disqualify for the gift in a will. Same way with eternal life that God gives as a gift to those who he calls, to those who repent. And a failure to repent will disqualify one for the gift, and instead will qualify one for a reward of, you call it a reward, a reward of the lake of fire, eternal death. So, mankind would write the lesson of the death of mankind, of all mankind, were it not for the fact that Jesus Christ promises in Matthew 24, if you want to turn there with me, around verses 21 and 22, you'll see that it says that just before mankind would destroy all mankind in a genocide of all mankind, annihilation of all mankind, Jesus Christ says he will step in. God the Father will have Jesus Christ step in at just that last moment before man would blow all of mankind off the face of the earth. Verses 21 and 22 of Matthew 24. For then shall be great tribulation. Let's just put this chart up on the screen for a moment. This chart shows 6 of the 7 seals of Revelation. It shows the first 6 of the 7 seals, which Revelation 6 mentions all 6 of these seals. It depicts the first 4 as horses with horsemen and horses of different colors. And Jesus Christ described the attributes, characteristics, activities of these four horses in plain language in Matthew 24. They lead up to the fifth seal that Jesus Christ described as the martyrdom of saints and the great tribulation, seal number 5. And he's referring, after mentioning the seals that lead up to the great tribulation and the martyrdom of saints in that great tribulation, he then says in verse 21 of Matthew 24, "For then shall be great tribulation," that fifth seal you saw in the chart, "there shall be great tribulation such as was not since the beginning of the earth or the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be." It's going to be such a bad time, the time of Jacob's trouble, that nothing before it has ever been as bad, and nothing after it will ever again, thankfully, be as bad. And verse 22, dear friends, "Except those days be shortened, there should no flesh be saved," as the Moffat translation says, alive. No flesh should be saved alive, but for the elect's sake. This verse finishes. Jesus Christ concludes on a positive note, but for the elect's sake, those days should be shortened. Just before, or shall be shortened, those days shall be shortened. Just before man would annihilate all mankind off the face of the earth, those days shall be shortened. Meaning Jesus Christ will return his second time to this earth, his return, and he'll stop mankind from annihilating all, from doing a genocide of mankind. Not just one race, but all races. Genocide of all races of man. Christ will stop it by intervening at just the last second. But for the elect's sake, he shall intervene. All right, friends, we have just a little bit of time left, and I've got to cover some of the Malaysian stories. And I've got one more story about these Russian troops. You've heard how they've taken control of a Crimean naval base at Feodosia, the third such attack in 48 hours, according to Ukrainian officials. Defense spokesman said that Russians had attacked the base from 2 directions using armored personnel carriers and stun grenades. Ukraine now controls just 1 police base in the entire Crimean region, from where Mark Lowen reports.
We're outside what is, in effect, the last piece of the Ukrainian state here in Crimea. This is a police base in the Crimean capital, Simferopol, and it is the last facility that is still under Ukrainian control. It has not fallen to the Russian forces. You can see here on the gate the emblem of the Republic of Ukraine, the national symbol there. And inside we've seen troops. A couple of weeks ago, Russian forces came here to try to force them to surrender, but the Ukrainians refused to do so, and the Russians have not yet been back. It is unclear, really, what is going to happen to this police base in the coming days. But elsewhere, a very different picture, because the Ukrainian Defense Ministry has now told us that every military base here in Crimea is now under Russian control. There are simply 2 Ukrainian ships that are still flying the Ukrainian flag. The Russian forces attempting to seize them back to Russia. Now, that has all prompted the Ukrainian President, Alexander Turchinov, the interim president, to order a withdrawal of all Ukrainian forces and their families from Crimea to mainland Ukraine. And it is a very significant moment, because it is de facto a military surrender to Russia, although Kiev would never accept that word, because in the Ukrainian government's eyes, Russia's operation here has been totally illegal and unconstitutional. But it has been, though, a tacit recognition from Kiev that Ukraine has been completely overwhelmed and outgunned by the Russian forces here in Crimea. Now what will happen is that the last remaining Ukrainian troops will probably be forced to withdraw to mainland Ukraine, and then pretty much the game for Kiev will be up, and Russia's takeover, complete control of the Crimean Peninsula, will be virtually complete.
Friends, I have an update since that report. We've got a report from just 1 hour ago that's Head notes, Russian forces have seized all the Ukrainian military bases in Crimea, giving soldiers the choice of leaving the country or pledging allegiance to Russia. Earlier this month, Russia annexed the Crimea region from Ukraine after a referendum considered illegal by Kiev and the West.
To the victors go the spoils. A warm embrace for Russian troops. But to the vanquished Ukrainians, an order to pack up and leave. This was their final stand. It ended with the Russian flag flying and its troops manning the gate at the Feodosia Marine Base.
This was the last Ukrainian military base, and it is now firmly in Russian hands as President Putin consolidates his control of Crimea. The question now is what happens to the thousands of military personnel and their families for whom Crimea has been home.
For some, it meant today they had to say farewell. Forced to choose who their allegiance belongs to and say goodbye to friends and comrades they'd known. Artur is leaving for Ukraine. His best friends have chosen to stay behind. These are my best friends, he says, and I have to say goodbye to them. A sympathetic crowd tells the Marines they've been abandoned. I was defending the base, the young man says, and not a politician or a general came to help us. And so a ragtag convoy of Ukrainian Marines pulled out, shouting honour to the Navy. It was more like humiliation. They were finally given orders to withdraw by Kiev today. President Putin's men had given them a stark choice: join Russia or leave Crimea. They chose the latter. But many Crimeans aren't going anywhere. They've been celebrating their new status, even offering support to Russian speakers across the border in Ukraine. This nationalist fervour has some worried, including the Archbishop of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church here. Some of his flock, even some of his priests, have fled. He's been given assurances by the new government, but he's still afraid to go out at night.
Yes, I'm afraid. Look at what's happened to Ukrainian activists and military commanders who've been arrested and beaten. Anything could happen to us. People don't want to betray their country and become citizens of Russia, but they're also scared.
Moscow's takeover is as good as complete. It's brought joy and anguish, and dark fears about what comes next in this region. Ian Pannell, BBC News, in Crimea.
Okay, friends, now we're going to go to several reports on the missing Malaysian Airlines flight MH370. In the first report, you'll hear how the Malaysian Prime Minister has announced that the plane crashed in the southern Indian Ocean. And then in a report following that, you'll hear how the Chinese media released that information. Then we'll have some reports that show this may not be as conclusive as some are saying. In this first report, John Sudworth reports from Beijing.
The following report contains flash photography.
Some grieved quietly. Others uncontrollably. This woman's only son, her daughter-in-law and only grandson were on the missing plane. After 2.5 weeks of daring to hope, they were told all hope is gone. At least 6 people were carried out on stretchers. The news that the plane has crashed came from the Malaysian Prime Minister in Kuala Lumpur.
It's a remote location, far from any possible landing sites. It is therefore with deep sadness and regret that I must inform you that according to this new data, flight MH370 ended in the southern Indian Ocean.
That assessment is not based on anything having yet been found by the intensive air and sea search. Instead, it is further analysis of the fleeting final signals sent by the plane that leads investigators to now conclude it has indeed crashed here in the remote southern Indian Ocean. Some relatives received the news by text message from Malaysian Airlines before tonight's emergency briefing had begun.
None of those on board survived.
This man's parents were on board. He tells me he won't accept that all is lost until a piece of hard evidence is pulled from the sea.
We want to let other people know how suffering we do. And we don't know who we can trust.
A large number of medical staff have been drafted in for this announcement, with the authorities keenly aware that after 18 long, hard days, this was likely to be the toughest yet. But with no physical evidence, no piece of the plane to show them, for the relatives amid the grief and anguish, there also remains a lingering sense of suspicion. If they're dead, show me their bodies, this woman cries. No one's yet given them proof, let alone explained why and how the plane went so far off course. John Sudworth, BBC News, Beijing.
Okay, friends, so you see, even though the Malaysian Prime Minister is announcing that it's over, there is some controversy continuing about it. And this next story will show you some of the events that led up to their concluding that that last ping told them where that plane would last be. Of course, there are reports, we gave some reports about a week ago of some suspicion that plane was diverted somewhere. You can go back a week. I'm not going to rehearse that again, friends. This thing is mysterious enough. But you can go back to the archive a week ago if you want to hear some of the details about what the Kremlin report said about the United States Navy being involved in diverting that plane to a certain secret island in the Indian Ocean waters, in the atoll of Diego Garcia. But this video from Chinese media say that a Chinese plane, it also had the Chinese flight number 748. They say that a Chinese plane hunting for the missing Malaysian airliner has spotted, quote-unquote, suspicious objects, according to state media. An announcement on China Central Television said several pieces of debris had been seen, and the information had been shared with Australian search teams working in the Indian Ocean. And some of the debris that had been seen was described as cylindrical, like an airline body would be, the tube of the airline, cylindrical, and some other descriptions that would sound like an aircraft carrier. A short time after that report, Australia announced that it had spotted two separate objects in the area. One that, like I said, was cylindrical, and the other object I believe they'll describe in this video, and that a Navy ship had been sent to retrieve those two objects.
A Chinese military transport aircraft has found several suspicious objects while searching for the missing Malaysian airliner above the southern Indian Ocean. According to the coordinates released by the search crew, these objects are located at 95.11 degrees east longitude and 42.5 south latitude. China has already sent this information to Australia and the Chinese ship Zhuelong.
Okay, friends, now we are going to go over just a little bit tonight. Sometimes, I reserve the privilege to turn our half-hour program into a 45-minute program at times when news is a little more significant or with greater impact to it, as such as happening tonight with Ukraine and Egypt and events in the United States. One we announced at the opening of the program tonight out of the state of Washington and Osso, Washington. And we'll have a report as we close tonight out of a train derailment in Chicago in the state of Illinois in the United States. But in this next video, you'll see how flares were dropped in the South Indian Ocean to mark those objects spotted in the hunt for missing Malaysian Airlines flight MH370. The markers were dropped by a Royal Australian Air Force P-3 Orion aircraft, which identified the two objects that we mentioned. They identified them at 2,500 kilometers southwest of Perth earlier today. The Australian Navy is hoping to pick up the objects within a few hours, according to to Malaysia's transport minister.
The flight's been successful in terms of what we're looking at here today. We're looking for debris in the water, and we've sighted a number of objects both on the surface and beneath the surface visually as we flew over the top of them. First object was rectangular in shape, slightly below the ocean. Second object was circular, also slightly below the ocean. We came across a long, or a cylindrical object that was probably maybe 2 meters, possibly 2 meters long, about 30 centimeters across. We came across another item in the area that was also cylindrical and shaped in a rough fish hook. That's pretty much what we've seen out there today. All we provide is the possibility that they are, as well as a location, a time, and we mark those objects. So that's all we can provide. The analysis will be left to the photographers, the image analysis once we land, as well as HMAS Success once she steams into the area and hopefully retrieves some of these objects.
Now, friends, that report was from about 5 hours ago. This next report from about 4 hours ago from Malaysian officials saying that Australian air crews have spotted two objects in the southern Indian Ocean. And if you could hear, well, the man that was just speaking in that last video, as he was saying, one object was circular and one was rectangular. And then they also said they found a 2-meter piece that was cylindrical. Earlier searches by a Chinese plane saw two relatively big floating objects and several smaller white ones dispersed over several miles. John Donison has this report from about four hours ago.
For 5 days, the vast southern Indian Ocean has yielded few clues. Today that changed. An Australian search plane fired flares to mark the spot after 4 pieces of possible debris from the missing Malaysian jet were sighted. Special data buoys were dropped to track any shifts in position caused by the strong currents.
First object was rectangular in shape, slightly below the ocean. Second object was circular, also slightly below the ocean. We came across a long, or a cylindrical object. We came across another item in the area that was also cylindrical and shaped in a rough fish hook.
Dozens of flights this week have spotted virtually nothing, but today a Chinese plane also reported seeing suspicious objects amid the waves. But from the Australian Prime Minister, a word of caution.
Planes and ships continue to search the area for any sign of the missing aircraft. I caution again, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker, that we don't know whether any of these objects are from MH370.
An Australian Navy ship, the HMAS Success, is one of several vessels trying to find that out. And it could then take days to transport anything they do find, the 1,500 miles back to dry land. And unless the plane's crucial black box is found, we may know what happened, but we won't know why. John Donnison, BBC News in Perth.
Thank you, John. Friends, in this next report, you'll hear how the southern Indian Ocean area was pinpointed from information based on analysis from British satellite firm Inmarsat. They were able to work out the flight south, that the flight went south after comparing previous Malaysian Airlines Boeing 777 flights with satellite data with this flight MH370. They compared it to previous Boeing 777 flights. Inmarsat's senior vice president for external affairs, Chris McLaughlin, told the BBC's Richard Westcott that the firm studied electronic pings sent from the plane.
In layman's terms then, how have you finally concluded this aircraft flew south?
Well, as you know, we originated a theory based on a series of pings or handshakes, and we sent those to the investigation. Over the intervening time, we've been looking at those pings and whether we could add anything more to them. So we took Malaysian 777 aircraft data, modelled that, and then put that against the northern and the southern path. And what we discovered was that the path to the south is undoubtedly the one taken.
So you've compared it to other aircraft. I mean, why haven't you come up with this before? Why has it taken so long to get to this point?
We have been dealing with a totally new area. We've been trying to help an investigation based on a single signal once an hour from an aircraft that didn't include any GPS data, any time and distance information. So this really was a bit of a shot in the dark, and it's to the credit of our scientific team that they came up and managed to model this. And they managed to find a way in which to say just a single ping can be used to say the plane was both powered up and travelling, and then by a process of elimination, comparing it to other known flights, established that it went south.
Is this it now, or can you pinpoint even further where it might be?
We can't help you with any closer data. If aircraft were mandated to report their position, we'd have been able to tell you in an instant.
Are you happy with the way the Malaysians have processed all of this data? Because you have been giving them quite a lot, and they have at times been looking in the wrong place.
As you know, we shared the original suggested model on the 11th, and we also shared it with our own authorities on the 12th. The emphasis for the Malaysians must have been on cutting back on all the data they were getting. It must have been a very complicated time. They'll have been dealing with neighbours that they may not necessarily get on with. They'll have been trying to get through a whole series of data to eliminate. So it's very hard for us to criticise them.
Is the reality that opportunities have been missed to pinpoint the search area much sooner?
I can't say. What I can say is that we had both a north and a south route, and that by the Thursday of the first week, the Americans were dispatching a Poseidon P-8 into the Southern Ocean, and they were also dispatching the USS Kidd.
Now, it's going to frighten, I think, a lot of people that an aircraft can go missing like this. Is there a way of stopping this happening in the future?
It can be done. It can be done now. Any aircraft can burst off of it via our existing technology, SMS text-like messages that give you time, speed, distance and position. It can be done now. It's a wonder that it hasn't been done 5 years after the Air France loss, but the industry is slow moving and needs to evolve with technologies that are already established on long-range identification and tracking for ships at sea. It's inconceivable that ships at sea wouldn't now report their position every 6 hours. Surely an aircraft flying at 470 knots should be reporting its position every 15 minutes. And, frankly, that can be done at wholesale rates of $1 an hour.
Friends, before this interview with Chris McLaughlin, the BBC's Richard Westcott went inside Inmarsat's control center in London. And in this video, Richard Westcott reports from there.
This is the Central London Control Centre of Inmarsat, who've been the British company really at the forefront of helping to solve this riddle. And what they've actually done is they've looked back at other 777 Malaysian flights, and they've looked at what signals those have sent to their Indian Ocean satellite, which is what this big area represents here. That's what the satellite can see, and the aircraft would have taken off here. They've compared it to those previous flights and drawn up a graph, and effectively they've managed to work out that the flight definitely took off and went south, ending up somewhere down here in the southern Indian Ocean rather than in that northern corridor where they've also been looking.
Okay, and friends, talk about those large corridors, two large corridors, one stretching to the northwest of the last known location in the Malacca Strait, and one to the southwest. In this next video, BBC's weather lady, Elizabeth Siri, explains how weather conditions could hamper further efforts for retrieving, searching down and retrieving those the debris that they believe may be the missing MH370 aircraft.
Hello there. With so much focus in recent days on the search for the missing Malaysian airliner, there has been some talk about potential weather impacts. Now, the Indian Ocean is a vast area, and we do have tropical cyclones in this area. We have one currently, Tropical Cyclone Gillian. Now, it is lying to the north of the search area, and it's expected to weaken over the next couple of days. Now, yes, the track of that cyclone does go southwards, but then it also turns away towards the west. And even though it is heading southwards, as I mentioned, the Indian Ocean is a vast area, and it still keeps it many hundreds of miles away from the current search area for the missing airliner. What's far more likely to cause an effect is the passage of weather fronts moving through, the normal sort of weather events, if you like, these weather systems moving through, bringing episodes of cloud and rain, perhaps some stronger winds from time to time as well. So it's more likely to be these that could cause some potential problems for those search and rescue teams.
And friends, we'll conclude tonight's report with information out of Chicago, Illinois in the United States about a commuter train at Chicago O'Hare International Airport that has derailed, injuring 32 people. The train came off the tracks, crossed a platform, and traveled partway up an escalator at one of the busiest airports in the United States.
An 8-car commuter train derailed at Chicago's O'Hare Airport overnight, injuring 32 people on board when it failed to stop at the airport's underground station. Police officials say the train hit the buffers, then mounted the pavement, ending up on the escalators to the airport, one of the busiest in the United States. The exact reason for the crash is still being investigated.
And friends, we're thankful to report that none of the reported injuries are serious. Your reporter, your BBC reporter for that story was Geeta Guru Murthy. And friends, that's it for tonight's report. We went a little longer than usual, but if you stayed with us, you saw the news tonight very impactful and significant for this Monday, March 24, 2014. God willing and the creek don't rise, friends, we'll be back again tomorrow night with the current day's news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, this is your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying, so long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on COGTV.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the COGTV.org video archive.